Hello, welcome to Living and Dying, the program that brings you news and information about Brattleboro Area Hospice, its people and its activities. My name is Richard Ewald and I'm a hospice volunteer. The conversation we're going to have today is about having conversations about death. And in order to explore that, we brought to the studio here today two people who are very good at this. One is Patty Dunn, works for the Brattleboro Area Hospice. Hello, Patty.
Hello, thank you.
And the other is Joanna Rueter, who is a hospice volunteer, as I am, and has a background in this as well. Why don't you share with us a little bit of your hospice background so we can understand what brings you to this?
Okay. I'm new to the agency, gratefully, and I have been doing hospice work for more than 20 years in a private hospice setting, a residential home for people in their last 6 months of life. And actually, if I back up, I started as a hospice volunteer. And then I did some private caregiving in people's homes after Vermont Respite House. And then I went on to direct a small nonprofit non-medical hospice, much like Brattleboro Area Hospice, for the last almost 10 years. So that's, in a nutshell, what I've been doing.
Okay. Joanna?
Well, thinking about your question for a second, I remember working as a college student in a nursing home. And I remember a woman who was dying and having a sense of being quietly by her with sort of a, it's okay, it's all right. And that was my own internal hospice in a way. And in 1994, I came to hospice here for help myself because my mother was dying. And she had hospice in Rhode Island, and it was very clear to me that that made a big difference. That having somebody there who knew what death looked like could calm the rest of us down. So that we could be with my mother and not freaking out, basically. And I think since then, I've just wanted to know more. And I am a trained hospice volunteer now. And also have had I've had about 5 different people in my extended family die in the last 2 years. And each time I've learned more about what's possible and what the choices are and what can happen well if you have some knowledge, pre-knowledge. And so that's my question.
And part of what you do today is through your enterprise called Sustainable Aging, right?
Yes.
Okay, and we'll talk more about that. Well, in America right now, we inhabit this sort of mindset that has kind of ignored death and tried to push it away. And those of us in the hospice world, we're trying to bring that conversation more into daily life in a number of ways. And most of it is having to do with trying to make things go a little bit better toward the end for our loved ones and for ourselves. And there are many ways we can plan for that, anticipate it, and so many topics that we can talk about. A couple that we'll probably just touch on today have to do with the medical and legal aspects of advanced directives, having a will, financial planning, all that sort of thing are necessary. Not necessary. You can die with doing none of it, but it certainly goes better for you or your family if you've done some planning and discussions around that. But I have the sense that where we're going today is more in the larger sense of having the conversations in our families about what kind of death we'd each like. Do I have that right? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. It's
if we get to choose.
Right,
I just thought I'd footnote that.
Right, some people...
in case we get to have some say about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And in some ways, when you were talking about how death isn't talked about and it's kept at arm's length, it used to be that people died at home and were cared for by their loved ones, and from sickness through burial and funeral. And that's changed, as has the way we die. Now with medical advances, people are dying differently, even than when hospice started. Hospice was set up to care for people who were dying a certain in a certain way with a more clear-cut trajectory. Now people are living longer with chronic illnesses and with lots of complications and not a clear sense of when death will arrive or whether it's wanted. There's always a new experimental drug or treatment, and it's, I think, confusing for a lot of people. And it's pushed natural dying further and further away from us. So I like the idea of inviting it back in, befriending it, considering the possibilities when we do face it, when we do meet our discomfort and our fear, and exploring options and choices that we do have in the midst of an illness that we may not have a choice about.
We've talked about, among ourselves, about this isn't a conversation to be had just by elders who are dying or people who are sick and expect to be dying, but at any time in our lives, this is a useful conversation to have in our families as a group, for example, just to start the conversation before the last minute. As we all know, there's often no time, or maybe if we have the gift of several months with a dying loved one, or 1 hour. So there's no time like the present somehow to get over our fears of the conversation, or this distance that we've inherited that is also probably somewhat natural not to really want to talk about death and dying. So how do we do that? Joanna, will you just walk around in your personal life and ask people questions about this? What happened on this trip we were on?
Oh, so I'm in lovely Puerto Rico, and I am about to go on a kayak outing in the evening where the water turns into sparkles. And there were a lot of kids, I would say kids being 30 or something, and there were a few of us oldsters. And I'd say after finding out where they came from, I just said, I just want to ask you, do you have an advance directive?
And they said, excuse me?
No, that's what's so funny. There was no reaction like that.
And they knew what you meant.
Yes. Now, there are plenty of people who don't. This has been part of I have this quest to find out. And somebody else in Puerto Rico, when I asked, he didn't know what it was about. So, but people seem, when you just broach that, say, I mean, he was willing for me to show him the Colorado Advance Directive on his website, that it existed. And then my whole thing is that what you decide is not as important as knowing that there are decisions to be made. Yeah. Decisions
about what?
About, I sort of see it in a broader way, which is that, we live our lives according to certain values and beliefs and priorities. So why wouldn't we meet our end in the same way, with that same overriding umbrella of, okay, based on what I believe and what I strongly value and what life means to me and what living well means to me, why wouldn't I also consider, well, when that time comes that I know that my life is coming to an end, what is important to me? What matters? What's a priority?
And what do most people want?
Well, statistically, most people say they want, when the time comes, to be at home, surrounded by friends and family and love, and in the comfort of their homes.
And what is the reality?
The reality is most people don't die at home. Most people are still dying in nursing homes and hospitals. So I think that having these conversations is a bridge to changing that and shifting what we say we want and what's actually happening.
And I think even more, if you think about what you love in your life, I mean, it just fits right in there with, well, I like sitting quietly on a rock, whatever it is, that to some degree that can be carried into death if you have any idea what death looks like. I had a thought that disappeared, but I'm just going to jump here because I use this as a comparison. This is Learning to Speak Alzheimer's.
Did you hold that up to the camera?
And this book came out in 2003 and radically changed the way people interacted with Alzheimer's patients, family members.
Because it changed the language to use with a person who is experiencing
And it
Alzheimer's?
changed the thinking. And that's what I really feel is available to us.
Could you give an example of that?
Of the thinking?
Yeah, or just something from the book that...
Well, from the book, it used to be that if somebody with Alzheimer's sat down to dinner and said, we're going to wait for my father. We're not going to have dinner till Dad gets here. It used to be that a caregiver or family member would say, look, Dad died 20 years ago. And what happens to the person who's speaking, the first person, it's a shock.
Right.
And because they don't remember, they get shocked over and over again. And this she calls it habilitation model, which is where you go with the feeling and you say, what did Dad like for dinner? So you're not lying and saying he's coming to dinner, but you shift the emotion to a memory. Oh, he liked roast beef, and everybody can talk about that, or he liked mushrooms.
And then that blockade is gone.
Yeah. And you don't have that crash of concept. And so if people know something about what death looks like, then when it's happening, they don't have to go, oh my, there's not that shock factor. It's like, oh, there's that sound. Oh, right, I remember I read about that. Oh, that's natural. And then you could stay there and say, Mom, I love you, instead of just being panicked.
What do I say now, right?
So I feel as though there's so much value in learning about death and having it as part of, okay, so, people are born, people live, people die. And so it's a combination of knowledge and choices, I think.
And understanding what's possible.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that that you can ask questions and the kinds of questions that you can ask. I'm thinking about my own personal experience when my dad died. Thankfully, because of my hospice experience and knowledge, I knew when he landed in ICU unresponsive and on life support after going in for a routine Coumadin check and collapsed in the chair, which activated the emergency system. And they resuscitated him. It took them a long time. Basically, he ended up in ICU, and when I met with the ICU doctor, the first thing I asked for was a palliative care consult. I knew, because he had an advance directive, that he wouldn't want to be kept alive on life support. I didn't really know his prognosis, but based on the many, many people I've accompanied who are dying and the familiarity I had with the dying process, I could tell that Dad was part way gone, and he was being kept alive, and he wasn't going to recover. He wasn't going to be Dad again in the way that we and he would want. And so that's why I asked for a palliative care consult, because the ICU doctor was giving us different information. He was guaranteeing that Dad will have a full recovery, he will walk out of here, and it just didn't fit my experience or observation. And luckily, the palliative care doctor confirmed my sense of things and agreed that she felt the same thing, that he was not gonna leave here, and he may not be responsive again. So that was.
Well, you knew that as an experienced hospice person. For those of us who don't have that experience, how can we gain that knowledge of those, the right things to say and the right way to advocate?
By talking about it, by entering into this subject. And I think that that's what we're advocating today is
It's
it's
almost like becoming good shoppers in a funny way.
It is.
informing ourselves.
Actually, it is.
It's calling on our courage informing ourselves. And I'm going to put a plug in right here for Brattleboro Area Hospice website, which is a stellar, phenomenal resource in terms of end-of-life issues. One of the best that I've seen, and I've seen a lot of websites. And that's a great place to start, to just peruse, see what's there, read articles, see how what you're reading matches your own experience and thoughts and beliefs about dying and death. I think just familiarizing ourselves individually before we even think about talking to anyone else, but just starting to build a knowledge base, an awareness base.
And for those who may not have web access or might like to speak to someone, the number is 257-0775. Or you could drop into the hospice office, and there's a tremendous library with videos and books.
Tremendous public lending library, free. And so I again, thank you for mentioning, because not everybody's online. But many of the resources that they'll find online can be found in the library.
You know, so one of the strange things is that we've been talking about is that people have death coming into their living rooms on a regular basis, violent death.
Right.
And
through television and movies.
yeah, exactly.
Hopefully not really actually through the door.
No, I don't mean really through the door.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously some people do, but mostly it's on television, in our country anyway. And yet to really talk about what it really looks like. You know, on the TV, the person is, you know, blood's pouring out of them, and they're usually already dead, and then you may get a reenactment of how they died. But people aren't familiar with how gentle death can be and what's possible. You know, that you can play music, that people, one of the things that you're talking about is that people's hearing stays as long, it's the longest remaining sense. And so you want to treat, I remember the hospice nurse even saying to, after my mother died, she said, "Sally, we're going to wash you," you know, with complete respect and kindness. And if you know that as a family member, or about that, if you know about the possibilities, you can even say to a nurse, "Please," you know, or a busy hospital, or whomever, or a friend who's coming in and saying, "How's she doing?" You know, you say, "Wait, mom can hear you." You could ask her quietly. Yeah. Because people don't know about this stuff.
Patty, in your long experience being in the homes of people who are dying, those folks who are there have already partly gotten their wish by being at home and not in a hospital, for example, or somewhere else. Could you tell, just in the setting, in being in the room, which families may have talked about this beforehand, or various comfort levels in this horribly uncomfortable moment?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes my most important role as a guide or someone who was accompanying them was to invite people closer. So I might be sitting right close to the bed of someone who is dying, and the family member might be across the room, frightened, and just come over here, sit here, if you want, you know, and just walking with them closer.
And when you're in the room and they're in the room, you can extend that invitation personally. So for anyone who's watching this program, how can we reach them? How can we invite them? What can we say? What can we do? What can we do to break down that thing? What do we do with our families? I was joking about this before. Do we wait until Thanksgiving dinner and say, "Hi, you know, I'd like to be buried in my clown costume," like that fellow did, you know? How do we?
Well, if you saw this show, you could say, "I saw this show." And I realize we haven't had any conversation in our family. And I would say probably for someone who's doing this for the first time, Thanksgiving may not be the best time. But I'll bring it up no matter when.
Yeah.
But a quiet time with somebody and said, I've been thinking about this. I've been wondering about this. You can do that quietly.
Planting the seeds. I mean, I think in some ways it's like a lot of difficult conversations. When it was clear to me that my dad should stop driving, he's living with Parkinson's. This is my stepfather. It occurred to me, okay, this is really difficult. I have to broach the topic of Dad, I'm not sure if it's safe for you to drive. And so I just started by planting the seed. Have you thought about when the time comes that you won't be able to drive? Because I think that when that time comes, it's easier to digest if you start thinking about it incrementally in small doses. So it's really just planting the seed and starting in small ways to have those conversations naturally. Obviously, if someone's sick, the door is pretty well cracked. Have you thought about what will happen if the treatment doesn't work? How do you want things to go? What would be important to you? What's important to maintain in terms of your dignity? Because I think we have some control and choice in how we, and whether you can maintain certain things that you want to maintain.
We've been talking so far about having these conversations in our family, and yet Brattleboro Area Hospice has picked up on the Death Cafe concept. Could you describe how that works?
Yeah, I haven't been to one yet, but it sounds like a phenomenal way for an organization to safely and respectfully and in the most non-threatening way to put this scary topic on the table for people to come together. Even you could bring family members, or you can leave your family members at home and talk with complete strangers. And sometimes that can be safer than talking to family members. But it's a public forum where we provide an opportunity on a particular night at a local cafe or bakery for people to come and just explore the topic of death. And we have, how I understand it, is round tables set up with staff people sprinkled about to help guide the conversation. But really, the important thing is that there's no agenda. We ask people to come with the willingness to explore. And the first one that was held, I think there were 40 people there.
Yeah, coffee shop in Brattleboro.
Yep.
There's one coming up in Townsend, and then one in Bellows Falls.
Yes, we don't have the dates yet, but if people
the
stay
website,
connected to
right.
our website, they'll be able to get those dates.
And there are also opportunities at hospice itself. Aren't there support groups where people can come, or workshops online, or up in, I'm blanking on the program that's coming up.
Death and Dying for Beginners?
Sure, one of the Gathering Place coming up in February.
Oh, I'm
That's
sorry.
actually-
Yeah.
That's more of that's a combination of, it's an in-service, but it's also open to the public.
Okay,
And it's going to be on February 13th, it's the first night of it.
at the Gathering Place.
At the Gathering
Right.
Place. And it's an opportunity it's slightly different from the Death Cafe in that there is some structure where you get to talk to people in little groups, again, at little cafe-like tables, and look at things like, well, whose death do I know about? What death have I actually experienced? And what am I worried about? And there will be in that particular workshop series, information about advanced directives and what that looks like, which is just a document. And it's a valuable document, but it's not the whole piece by a long shot. It's good to have, but you need to have somebody there who knows what it says with you. And in my experience, it's really having an advocate, or they call it an agent with the advanced directive, which is somebody who's comfortable with what your wishes are, is essential as well. Because the thing to know is that when there's a crisis, everybody's not calm and wondering what should happen next.
Right.
Right. So if you have a wish, it needs to be known ahead of time. Yeah.
You and Patty both arrived here today with the same book.
Yeah.
tell us about this book.
Go for it, yeah.
Okay. Here's the book, My Mother, Your Mother, and is that long enough? Okay. No? Okay. By Dennis McCullough, and the subtitle is Embracing Slow Medicine, the compassionate approach to caring for your aging loved ones. And the thing about this book is it outlines what the path can look like from being 65 to 85 or whatever the age is, in a way that's very detailed and helpful. For instance, it's good to question whether that big surgery is going to give your parent more time really to have a quality time or not. And he's very realistic about how the medical system at this point, which has worked so hard to find solutions, sort of goes for the solution, which might not be the best quality of life for somebody. Somebody who was saying it, who wants, I think you were saying, wants to spend time, the summer. I want to be with my family for the summer, rather than be sick. We were talking about that yesterday. Rather than being sick on chemo to the last minute.
Yeah, you're talking about a story that of a friend of my husband's. His mom had been receiving treatment for cancer for years and was sort of on this prophylactic dose. And she went to her doctor and she said, "What would happen if I stopped chemotherapy?" And he said, "Well, you'd probably have a very good summer and then you'd die." And she said, "I think I want a good summer," because she had had years of basic lousiness and she was finished with that. And most people don't know that they can even ask.
And make that decision themselves.
And focus on, how do I want to live, rather than, do I want to just extend my days?
I think this is also time for those questions that are not maybe so weighty, but they came to mind when you were mentioning redirecting the person at the dinner table to say, what did Dad like to eat? As an opportunity to hear stories. When I was young, when you were young, what was it like? What did you do? I mean, that stuff is really gold. And I think, I wonder if that's a way to kind of enter into that deeper level of conversation that could turn towards some of the more difficult questions once it's sort of engaged.
And people love stories. They love to tell stories and they like to hear them. So, say I was a kid in a family where no one had ever talked about death. Whatever, 20-year-old in the family, and I became interested in this subject. I might say, "Well, were you around when Grandma died?" Most people know something about this topic, and if it's put out as a gentle question, they can tell you a story.
And especially if they're living with a known terminal illness. It's very rich and wonderful to engage in that kind of life review. And I'm doing that right now with my stepfather, who came into my life when I was 7. And he has his advance directives. I'm his agent, his healthcare agent. But he doesn't want to talk about his dying. He doesn't want to talk about what it might look like or what to expect. And I respect that, and I think that's very important. But I've been asking him about his life before I knew him. I don't know anything about his childhood, or not a lot, or about, things before he came into my life. And that's been really wonderful for me, and I think it's been really great for him to talk about.
It sounds like on the other edge of starting that conversation, it's almost like a threshold, that we have so much resistance to ask that question, to say that one thing, that if we can get past that threshold, we've opened the door. And there's a lot of gold on the other side of that that will come back to reward ourselves and our families over and over and over again. And I thank you for bringing that all here today.
Well, I thank you for framing it that way, because it really is about, in the most basic way, these conversations are about honoring who we are and what we hold dear, and how to maintain that till our last breath.
And hopefully we can do that.
Yeah.
But we've run out of time. But for those who are interested in talking about this more, you can contact Patty Dunn, the program director, hospice program director at Brattleboro Area Hospice, 802-257-0775, brattleborohospice.org. Joanna Rueter of Sustainable Aging. Thank you for coming. Thank you for bringing
Thank
your
you.
resources, and thank you for having us start that conversation here.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Rich, for allowing us the opportunity.